Welcome back to another retro game review. In 1988, Capcom entered into a joint project with the manga studio Moto Kikaku to develop a series known as Strider. Capcom would develop two games simultaneously, one for the arcade and another for the Famicom and Nintendo Entertainment System. At the same time, Moto Kikaku would develop a manga series that would originally be serialized in a monthly magazine, Comic Computique. The manga series ran for 6 issues between May and October of 1988. Capcom would release their games shortly after that in early 1989. Each of the Strider games and manga would feature the character Hiryu, a ninja mercenary known as a Strider. The inspiration for Hiryu and his robot helpers came from 1960s era ninja comics, according to the creator of the series. Strider Hiryu would go on to appear in a now disavowed sequel, Strider Returns, an official sequel in the 90s, Strider 2. The character would also appear in the Marvel vs. Capcom series as a playable fighter. He makes a cameo in other Capcom games such as Mega Man Legends and Street Fighter Alpha 2. Finally, he appears in a few crossover games like Namco Cross Capcom and Project X Zone 2, where he's partnered with Sega's Joe Musashi from Shinobi. Both the arcade and NES titles were developed at the same time, but are entirely different games. They were supposed to be launched around the same time, but due to some delays, the NES game was released 6 months later than the arcade version. For some reason never revealed by Capcom, the Japanese Famicom version was delayed and eventually cancelled, making this a North American exclusive NES game. I'm going to cover both versions in this video, starting with the arcade Strider. This version was released in January of 1989 in Europe first, with a Japanese release in March and a North American release in April. The game would later be ported to the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive and released in 1990. The arcade version was also released on the Sony PlayStation, in the Capcom Classics Collection for PlayStation 2 and Xbox, as well as ports appearing on the Master System and PC Engine. For this review, I played the Genesis version, which is incredibly faithful to the arcade. The only differences between the arcade and Genesis versions is that the Genesis version has a difficulty setting, limited continues, some sprite flicker not found in the arcade, missing voice samples during the cutscenes, and some strange loading times that freeze the game momentarily during stages. Other than that, the Genesis game looks almost like a one-to-one port to the arcade. This game doesn't follow the manga series, instead providing a different adventure for the main character. The game takes place in 2048, and a mysterious person known only as the Grandmaster has conquered the world. It's your job to assassinate him and free Earth from his tyranny. You start the game by infiltrating the Grandmaster's fortress in the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic, a country that at the time was part of the USSR, but is now modern-day Kazakhstan. The game is a side-scrolling platformer with a lot of fast-paced action along the way. You'll hack through hordes of enemies on your way to kill the Grandmaster through 5 stages. The stages include the Soviet base of the Grandmaster, a good introductory stage that allows you to get used to the gameplay. Stage 2 is the Siberian wilderness, where you'll fight wolves, tons of mechs, and even a giant gorilla robot. This stage is most known for the chase scene where you're outrunning an avalanche. Stage 3 is the aerial battleship Balrog, where you'll have to deal with both reversed gravity sections as well as a zero-G boss fight. Stage 4 puts you in the Amazonian jungle, where you'll be swinging from vines and fighting on the tops of giant dinosaurs. The 5th and final level is the Grandmaster's base on the 3rd moon. This puzzles me a bit, since the last time I looked we only have a single moon. And which one is the 3rd one? Or 2nd one for that matter? Each stage is very challenging but incredibly short, and this is the only real downside of this game. On top of that, each stage has a time limit, which means you're going to be running through the stages pretty quickly. The arcade machine lets you credit feed as much as you want, so if you're looking for more of a challenge, I'd recommend playing the Genesis or Mega Drive version, since you are limited to 3 continues, though the Japanese version requires a secret button combination to activate your continues. Overall, this game takes about a half an hour at most to beat once you're familiar with all of the stages. The game only has 2 action buttons, jump and attack. Your character can jump vertically or at an angle where he does a slow motion flip. While he's jumping like this, his hitbox is enormous, so you need to be careful. He can grab onto walls and grab platforms above him and pull himself up. Strangely, he can't drop back down from a platform once he's on top of it. You only have a single attack, which is your plasma sword, not to be confused with a lightsaber. Throughout the stage, you can find a power-up that will increase the range of your sword. You'll also find various item crates that contain robotic helper companions. You don't control them, they just follow you around and kill nearby enemies. None of the pickups are random, so you can always predict where to get a particular power-up. You have a life bar that starts with 3 hits. You'll find power-ups throughout the stages that will increase your life bar or heal you if you've taken a hit already, and you can have up to a total of 6 hits before you die. If you do die, the bar resets back to 3 and you'll have to start collecting those power-ups all again. This game is fun and fast-paced, and the platforms are placed in the way that take advantage of your floaty jump. There's not too much ultra-precision platforming that you're going to have to perform. There's also a lot of variety packed into this very short game. There's sections where you'll have to jump from flying vehicles to another, reverse and zero-gravity areas, along with fights on top of charging dinosaurs, and sections where you have to outrun an avalanche and a giant boulder Raiders of the Lost Ark style. Sadly, the music isn't very good, as the FM synthesis has a lot of harsh tones and none of the songs are very memorable. The sound effects are decent, with very clear sampled dialogue in the cutscenes, but the sound of your sword and other effects that are repeated ad nauseum, like the Amazon's grunting in Stage 4, will quickly get on your nerves. The graphics are what really stand out in this game. Character and enemy sprites are large and detailed, and every background has multiple layers of scrolling. This looked amazing in 1989. I remember seeing this game and Altered Beast in arcades, and I was blown away at the advances in graphical technology. Since prior to these games, the best graphics I'd seen, I think, was probably Pole Position. Next, let's look at the NES version of Strider. Unlike its arcade hack-and-slash cousin, this game focuses on exploration and is more reminiscent of a Metroid game than the arcade Strider. This version follows the storyline of the manga very faithfully. You play as the character Hiryu, a strider for a secret organization that specializes in smuggling, kidnapping, espionage, and assassinations. The second-in-command orders you to assassinate another strider, Kane, whom was captured. You decide to defy those orders and rescue your friend Kane instead. With the help of another strider, Sheena, Hiryu discovers a conspiracy between your organization and a secret enterprise. They've developed a mind control weapon, and Kane was the first test case. Had you followed your orders, assassinating Kane would have eliminated any evidence that they were building this weapon. You then set out on a mission to stop your own Strider organization. Before you're done, you'll have to destroy all the mind control weapons and square off against your own former commander. You start off at your base, an orbiting spaceship. From here, you can choose a number of locations across the world to travel to, view information that you've acquired on your missions, or get a password so you can pick up the game at a later time. I really like that when you select your password, the game ends with a preview text describing what your next mission will be. The way it's written reminds me of the narrated previews at the end of the 60s Batman TV show. It's little things like these that gave this game a whole lot of charm. You'll start with only a few locations that you can visit. In order to unlock more areas around the world to explore, you'll need to find clues in the areas that you visit. The first mission takes you to Kazakh, just like in the arcade game. You'll find that very few of these locations are linear. There are multiple paths to take, and you'll run into obstacles like locked doors that you'll have to come back to later on when you have a key for them. There are different ways to go in each area, but it's nowhere near as complex as a game like Metroid, so it's pretty difficult to actually get lost in this game. If you run across a locked door or obstacle that needs certain items to overcome, you'll need to remember that for later. Not all of these paths and locked doors are mandatory for the game. Some will lead to optional power-ups and items to help you along the way, kind of like a reward for spending the time to explore the area. Your health is represented by hit points. Achieving certain goals in the game, like talking to certain NPC characters found throughout the game, will allow you to level up. This increases your hit points and your skill points. You have a much more robust set of attacks in this game compared to the arcade. You still have your force sword, and you can even hold it above your head to protect you from enemies that try and attack from above. In addition to your sword, you will acquire various skills, or tricks as the game calls them. These include projectile attacks like fire or electricity, a healing ability which is incredibly helpful, a warp ability that returns you to the base instantly without having to backtrack to the entrance point of an area, a high jump, and an earthquake attack. Every ability requires skill points, which can be increased the same way as you gain more hit points. There are also many items to collect that will increase your abilities or allow you to progress through the game. There are 3 different boots that you'll need. The aqua boots allow you to walk on water, since you apparently sink like a boulder otherwise. Magnetic boots allow you to walk on walls and certain ceilings. And finally, the attack boots allow you to deal damage to enemies by sliding through them. There are 5 different keys that unlock various doors throughout the game. Seldom are keys for a certain door found in the same area as that door, so there's plenty of backtracking for you in this one. Finally, there are files that look like old 5¼ floppy disks from the early 80s. There are 6 of these, and analyzing them at your base will advance the plot and open up new areas to explore. This game is much longer than the arcade version, but it's nowhere near as difficult in terms of platforming. Most of the time that you'll spend will be exploring the large nonlinear areas across the world. The graphics are decent for the NES, but sometimes the color choices can be distracting, like in the pyramids in Egypt. There's no parallax scrolling, but the backgrounds are pretty detailed nonetheless. There's sadly a decent amount of sprite flicker due to the size of your characters and enemies being relatively large for the NES. The music is a lot better than the arcade, and some of the tracks sound like they belong in a Mega Man game. Sound effects seem like the standard stock effects from Capcom that they reuse in many of their NES titles, but they're still fun to listen to, and they aren't distracting or obnoxious in any way. The game isn't without its faults, though. The hit detection can sometimes not register correctly, and you'll occasionally have the issue where an enemy runs right through your attack and you take a hit. Jumping can also be quite frustrating, which isn't the biggest problem since there's almost no precision platforming in this game. What really started getting me mad, though, was the triangle jump. It's essentially the wall jump from Super Metroid, but incredibly difficult to pull off, even compared to Super Metroid. This is due to bad collision detection with the walls and your character. There are 3 spots in the game where this is mandatory to execute perfectly, and it took ridiculous amounts of time for me to get this to work. Still, I had a lot of fun with this game. If you like exploration games like the Wonder Boy and Monster World series, Metroid, Bionic Commando, or any Metroidvania-style game, you'll have a good time with this one. The exploration is enjoyable and not super confusing as the password system lets you play at whatever pace you like. You don't have to rush like the arcade game if you're looking for a more casual experience. Both versions of Strider are excellent, and I can't really decide which one I like better. It really comes down to what type of game I'm in the mood for, because they're both pretty good games to play. They're so different in terms of gameplay, though, that it's hard to imagine that the same developer made both of these games both at the same time. This was a really good idea, and I wish there were more games out there that followed this approach, giving you a good amount of variety. Off the top of my head, the only other game I can think of like this is Ninja Gaiden, where the arcade version was a belt-scrolling beat-em-up and the NES version was a platformer. I hope you enjoyed these reviews of the different Strider games. Let me know in the comments section if you played either of these and what you thought about them. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then.